Let me make something clear. Silence is not weakness, it is patience, it is strength under restraint. For too long, I watched the world build a story for me, frame by frame, headline by headline. But I never asked for the spotlight, I just stood in it, certainly. Here's an expansion of the point. Melania Trump addresses her silence in about 600 words, written in that bold, grounded, emotionally restrained tone, something you might hear from a character who's been quiet for too long but now chooses their words with clarity and strength. For years, I watched the world speak for me. They gave me headlines I didn't write, emotions I didn't feel, and intentions I never held. I became a mirror of what people wanted to believe silent, still, and stoic. They mistook my quiet for absence. But silence is a language all its own. It is the sound of holding back what others would spill too carelessly. It's the decision to wait, to think, to observe before making a move. My silence was not submission. It was not weakness. It was protection. In the spotlight, every word becomes ammunition. Every glance becomes a statement. And when you're surrounded by power, the cost of speaking is measured in consequences. So I chose quiet not because I was afraid, but because I was watching, because I was learning, because I was not ready to speak the truth out loud. Not yet. People assumed so much about me. They looked at my expression and saw only detachment. They looked at my position and saw only privilege. They never stopped to consider what it feels like to stand on a stage you never asked to be on, with a script you never wrote, in front of an audience who's already decided who you are. It's easy to judge silence when you've never had to survive inside it. But I was never asleep. I was never unaware. Every whisper, every betrayal, every moment of performative loyalty expected from me, I felt it, I endured it, and I filed it away. Because one day, I knew I would need to speak not in defense, not in rage, but in truth. That day is now. I won't pretend it was all darkness. There were moments of care, of understanding, even of love. But those moments were not enough to hold up a life where I had to disappear to keep the peace. I had to become smaller in rooms where I should have stood tall. And when you begin to lose your voice, you begin to lose your reflection. I didn't recognize the woman I had become in the mirror, not in the media, and not in my own heart. So I stopped speaking publicly because I refused to lie with a smile. I would not participate in a version of myself that I did not choose. And sometimes the only honest thing you can do in a world full of noise is to stay silent. But silence has its time. It serves its purpose. And eventually that time ends. Today I speak not because I owe anyone an explanation, but because I owe myself the truth. I owe that to the woman who kept quiet for too long. I owe it to every woman who watches from the sidelines, wondering if they're allowed to live a life that looks perfect on paper, but feels hollow in reality. I am not ashamed of my silence. It gave me time to find clarity. It gave me time to remember who I was before the cameras, before the politics, before the performance. Now I speak because I am no longer afraid of my own voice, and I will never be silent again. Let me know if you'd like the next section expanded to maybe her truth about the marriage or how she empowers other women. Growth doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it comes quietly through pain, through distance, through nights where you stare at the ceiling and wonder who you've become. Growth for me wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who I was before the world told me who to be. There's a strange thing that happens when you live in the shadow of power. People stop seeing you as a person. You become a role, a title, a symbol. But symbols don't feel, they don't hurt, they don't break. And because I wore that silence like a shield, people assumed I wasn't struggling. But growth is almost never seen. It's internal, it's quiet, and it hurts before it heals. I've spent years learning how to be still in the noise, how to survive when every move is watched, criticized, twisted. I learned that dignity isn't loud, it's patient. I learned that strength isn't always found in speeches or declarations. Sometimes it's in the refusal to become bitter, even when bitterness would have been easier. But personal growth, real, honest growth, that demands more than survival, it demands transformation. There came a moment where I could no longer pretend, not to the public, not to those closest to me, and most importantly, not to myself. That moment didn't come like thunder, it came like a whisper. A quiet voice inside that said, "This is not enough. You are not living, you are existing." And that voice didn't go away. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I should be grateful, that I had more than most. But what no one talks about is how empty life can feel when you are living someone else's version of success. When your smile becomes a costume and your silence becomes a prison. No amount of luxury can fill the space where joy used to live. So I started asking questions. Who am I without the cameras, without the title, without the expectation to stand beside someone else's power and pretend it's my own? The answers didn't come fast. They never do. Growth is slow. It doesn't ask for permission. It breaks what's familiar and demands you rebuild with truth. I found myself in the pages of old journals, in long walks alone, in the quiet corners of my mind where my own voice had been waiting. I found myself in the stillness, and then, slowly, I began to stand. Not as a reflection of someone else, but as a woman in her own right. Leaving wasn't weakness, it was strength. Choosing to walk away from a life that looked ideal but felt incomplete was the bravest thing I've ever done. I knew the world would talk. I knew the whispers would come. But I also knew I couldn't grow in a place where I had to shrink to fit. Now I grow by choice, not necessity. I surround myself with people who don't need me to be perfect, just real. I give myself permission to feel, to rest, to speak. I don't chase the image anymore. I chase peace, I chase truth. I chase the kind of joy that doesn't have to be posted, just lived. Personal growth isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it looks like tears on the bathroom floor or packing a suitcase with trembling hands. But eventually it begins to look like freedom. Like waking up and knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. I've grown, and I'm still growing. Not in spite of what I've been through, but because of it. The truth about the marriage isn't simple. It never was. From the outside, everything looked clean, elegant, measured, and in control. But the inside of a life is never what the photographs show. There are moments behind closed doors that no camera can catch. Words spoken in quiet tones that carry more weight than a headline ever could. When I said I do, I meant it. I believed in the vows, in the possibility of building something real. But believing in something doesn't guarantee it will last. A marriage built in public view becomes a performance if you're not careful. And somewhere along the way, ours became more about appearance than connection. More about standing together for the world and sitting together in truth. There were good days, yes. There were laughs, shared glances, the kind of intimacy that can't be faked. But there were also silences that cut deeper than shouting ever could. Times when I felt more like a fixture in a story than a partner in a life. I was seen, but not always heard, present, but not always felt. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes when you're never alone but still feel unseen. People ask why I stayed for so long. The answer is layered. You stay because you hope, because you tell yourself love can be rediscovered. You stay because you believe things will change, because you believe you can change them. And sometimes you stay because walking away from a life you helped build feels like tearing off your own skin. But love without respect fades, and a relationship without honesty becomes something hollow, something that looks solid from a distance but crumbles when you touch it. The truth is, I spent years convincing myself it was enough. That duty was more important than desire. That loyalty mattered more than my own inner voice. There were things I tolerated in silence, words said in anger, actions taken without discussion. I was expected to absorb it all and keep my composure, to be graceful, to be supportive, to be strong. But strength doesn't mean staying in something that stunts your spirit. Strength is knowing when to stop performing and start living. We didn't grow together, we grew apart. The man I married changed. Or maybe I did. Maybe we both did. But somewhere along the line, the partnership fractured. The trust weakened. And the space between us grew wider than any public appearance could hide. I will never turn our history into scandal. That's not who I am. But I will tell the truth, not to shame, but to heal, because my silence has protected a version of the story that no longer serves me. And I won't carry the weight of pretending anymore. The truth is, I tried. I gave what I could. And when I had nothing left that was mine, I stepped away. Not in rage, not in bitterness, but in clarity. We both played our parts. We both knew what this was and what it had become. And in the end, we both had to face the distance we created. Now, I don't look back with regret. I look back with understanding. That chapter of my life shaped me. But it doesn't define me. The truth behind the marriage is this. It was real, it was complicated, and eventually it was over. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something the world tells you to keep, simply because it no longer feels like home. There comes a point when you stop asking for permission to live, when you stop shrinking to fit into someone else's story and start writing your own. That's where I am now. Not at the end of something, but at the beginning, finally stepping into a life that feels like mine. Empowerment for me wasn't a loud moment. It didn't happen under bright lights or in front of a camera. It began quietly on the inside. It started the day I realized that being quiet wasn't helping me anymore. That holding it all in, pretending to be okay, carrying the weight of someone else's expectations, that wasn't strength. That was survival. And I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted to feel again. To live in a space where I didn't have to rehearse my words or edit my emotions, where I could laugh without watching who was watching, where I could be seen not as someone's wife, someone's symbol, but as a full, complex, powerful woman. Moving forward meant letting go of the image. It meant looking in the mirror and facing what I had ignored for too long. My own reflection, my own dreams, the sound of my own voice. For so many years, I had adapted to fit the shape of what was needed: graceful, composed, quiet. But that's not all I am. That was never all I was. I've learned that empowerment isn't given, it's claimed. It's something you reach for even when your hands are shaking. It's choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. It's walking away from the familiar, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. And when you do that, when you finally step into your own power, something changes. The fear doesn't disappear, but it stops controlling you. You stop waiting for someone else to say, "You're enough," because you've already decided that for yourself. Now, I walk forward with my head high, not because everything is perfect, but because I no longer need it to be. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's spotlight. I don't need validation in applause or approval. I've tasted peace, and that is more valuable than praise. The world can keep its expectations. I have my own now. I expect joy, I expect honesty, I expect freedom, and I give myself permission to evolve. I am not who I was 5 years ago, and I won't apologize for that. Growth is not betrayal. It's becoming. To every woman who's ever felt stuck, overlooked, silenced, I see you. I was you. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need permission to begin again. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need the courage to take one honest step in the direction of your truth. You will lose people. You will face doubt. But you will also find a strength you didn't know was there. You will learn to stand on your own, and when you do, it won't feel lonely. It will feel powerful. I'm not walking away from the past in shame. I'm walking toward my future in power. And this time, I'm not asking anyone to follow. I'm not waiting to be introduced or explained. I am enough on my own. This is not the end of my story. This is the chapter where I stop being the supporting character in someone else's and become the author of my own. I'm moving forward not to prove anything, but because I've finally remembered who I am, and I won't forget again. To every woman who has ever felt invisible in her own life, this is for you. To the ones who smile through discomfort, who stay silent to keep the peace, who give and give until there's nothing left for themselves, I see you. I know what that weight feels like. I've carried it too. It's not easy to admit when something that once felt like a dream has become a burden. It's not easy to walk away from a life that others envy, not when they only see the surface. They see the beauty, the clothes, the privilege. They don't see the quiet sacrifices. They don't see the way you fold yourself smaller every day just to fit the role you were given. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that makes them comfortable. You don't have to keep performing, pretending, or pleasing. You are allowed to want more for your soul, your peace, your purpose. There is strength in staying, yes, but there is also strength in leaving. There is power in choosing yourself, in deciding that your voice matters just as much as anyone else's. And if you've forgotten that, let me remind you now, you are not here to be quiet. You are not here to disappear behind someone else's name or story. You are here to live fully, boldly, and without apology. You may be scared, that's normal. Starting over is terrifying, especially when you've built your life around someone else's spotlight. But fear doesn't mean you're not ready. Fear just means the next step is real, and you've already survived so much you can survive this too. You don't have to explain your decisions to the world. You don't have to defend your pain, your healing, or your boundaries. You are allowed to walk away without making a scene. You are allowed to protect your peace without needing permission. Don't let anyone tell you that your worth is tied to your relationship status, your silence, or your ability to endure. You are not strong because you suffer. You are strong because you rise. Because you keep showing up for yourself, even on the days when no one else does. If you're in that place right now wondering if you're allowed to want more, to need space, to breathe, I am here to say, yes, you are. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to become something beyond what you've been told to be. Your life is yours. Your story is not finished. And the chapter you write next, it can be beautiful, even if the page you're on right now feels heavy. So stand tall, speak up, walk forward. Not because someone told you to, but because you remembered who you are. And because you finally realized you were never meant to be anyone's shadow. You are the light. No one expected me to speak. That was the first shock. They thought I would stay silent, as I always had, smiling politely, nodding at questions, letting speculation fill the spaces I refused to. But silence has an expiration date. And when I finally opened my mouth, it wasn't to whisper, it was to release the truth I had buried for too long. The world wasn't ready for it, not from me. People are comfortable when you stay in your place, when you play the role they've written for you. I was the quiet one, the elegant one, The one who stood beside power, not the one who challenged it. And that's why it shook them. Because when the silence broke, it didn't come with chaos, it came with clarity, with control, with a voice that had been forged in the fire of endurance. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just told the truth. And sometimes the truth is louder than any outburst. They were shocked that I didn't beg, didn't accuse, didn't play the victim. I didn't have to. My presence, my calm, my decision to speak after all these years, that alone rewrote the narrative. Because the moment I stood in my own power, I wasn't the supporting character anymore. I became the headline, the voice, the woman who refused to be defined by what she walked away from. And that scared people. They expected scandal, drama, a tearful confession, or a carefully worded statement crafted by someone else. What they got was a woman unafraid to tell her story, a woman who chose herself and didn't flinch while doing it. They weren't prepared for the honesty, the restraint, the strength. Because in a world that thrives on noise, it's the quiet confidence that unsettles the most. I didn't come to burn bridges. I came to stop building them where there was no foundation. I came to say what needed to be said and nothing more. That's what shocked them. Not just that I finally spoke, but how I did it. No bitterness, no revenge, just truth. And sometimes that's the most powerful shock of all.